So Candace Owens has a take on the recent death of Queen Elizabeth, and you'll be shocked to know that she has taken it upon herself to defend British colonialism within this context. This is her job, and she does it, I guess, wholeheartedly.
But why do you care? You're white. You have nothing to do with British colonialism. My family in Gambia was under the British Commonwealth. They even remember when Queen Elizabeth flew to Gambia in the 60s, 70s. So why these left-wing white people keep on self-anointing themselves to be spokespeople for black people? I think black people can speak for themselves. So let's continue.
She is being an apologist for colonialism for her white conservative audience.
But the real truth...
And you are a spokesperson for what black people's rights for your black audience, and that's very provocative. Let's continue.
Of the reason why people hate the Queen has nothing to do with the colonization, has something to do, which, by the way, just to be clear, the Brits invading Africa actually represents, and this is going to get me in trouble, but it was, if you look at how forward it brought the African colonies, it ended up being a net positive. Now, this is...
No, it's not a net positive. I want to go to the old times, the old caliphate. You know, we were civilized before they came. We had universities. We studied Islam, Iman, Ihsan, Tasawwuf, Sufism. We had ancient cultures and kings and queens and sultans and imams. You don't know your history because the history is whitewashed. I want the old days back. I don't want no British English schools in Africa. I want the old days back when we wrote Wolof, Fula and Mandinka in Arabic script. That's the days I want back.
Of course, it's going to get me in trouble because people somehow think that Africans were living happily ever after and things were great, and then the horrible English, British descended upon and murdered everybody, and the French suddenly murdered everybody, and that just isn't the truth. Obviously, the African nations had slavery, just like...
Not in the same way. Not in the same way. There were slave markets, but we didn't treat the slaves in this way. Not in the same way as the white disbelievers who came. But there were slave markets.
The European nations had slavery, so it's an evil that was not started, did not begin in Europe, actually. It can actually be traced back to Muslim origins.
All right, can you pause it, please? I'm sorry. There's a lot here. There's a lot.
Arab imperialist origins. Slavery has nothing to do with Islam.
Here.
This is Daily Stormer stuff, basically.
I mean, this is white supremacist talking points. That the if we could just bring it down really quick, like the British went to Africa to liberate them. They were primitive and they were not.
You see, this is why I don't like the white left. You see, she said primitive. She didn't say. She said it because she means it. That's how she thinks about black people. She thinks that black people are primitive. They are sorry ass, they are weak, and they need her to feel sorry for them. That was not a slip with the tongue. That's how she was not referring to what other people were thinking. That's what she really is thinking about black people. It was like a Freudian slip, you can say.
This is Daily Stormer stuff, basically.
I mean, this is white supremacist talking points. That the if we could just bring it down really quick, like the British went to Africa to liberate them. They were primitive and they were not able to construct their own societies. And
I'm sorry, but Candace Owens is a black sister. Has way more moral right to speak about slavery than you do as a white left-wing feeling sorry for black people, putting words in the mouth of black people, taking part of a history that you weren't a part of. That's all I have to say on that.
British and the European white saviors went there to liberate them, as opposed to like
and you are the white savior
the
now,
entire
aren't
continent
you?
in a haphazard way that would only be beneficial for capital, as opposed to like the explicit purpose of going there to enslave and traffic Africans. That was a net positive?
I'm sorry, does this make you feel good about yourself? You have nothing to do with this. White woman in the left, you have nothing to do with this. Don't speak for my people. Don't speak for our people. We can think for ourselves. We are not that stupid. We can speak for ourselves. We know what Queen Elizabeth did. Now, I send the condolences to the royal family. I wish King Charles Godspeed in his new role. We know very well the history of colonization and imperialization. We don't need you to inform us about it. This is very provocative. But this is woke left.
African company, which was how the colonies got their slaves for about 100 plus years.
What she's arguing has never not been the argument in favor of colonialism. The idea that the primitive peoples of the world were rather savages.
I'm so feminine. Why is my brother feminine? Brother, man up. Why are you feminine?
And necessitated the yoke of the English, the yoke of like the Christian missionaries, the
Come
yoke
on,
of the
man.
Dutch, et cetera, has always been a talking point for racist and pro-colonialists since the beginning of colonialism. The idea that slavery existed triangle slave trade, new world slave trade is also a fact that people sort of misinterpret because everyone knows that. Everyone's seen the Prince of Egypt, speaking about animated
they
movies,
misinterpret
we've
it.
all seen the Prince of Egypt. What they don't like to acknowledge is that American slavery and American European slavery was inherently different from the slave.
It was brutal. It was disrespectful. It was bloody. It was completely annihilating. Reschooling. It was racist. It was all the negative words. When one tribe lost, maybe if Fulas and Mandinkas fought, right? So the Fulas would lose the war. Then the Mandinkas would take the captives as not slaves, really, but they had to serve until they got their freedom, kind of like that. So like a war captives. That type of slavery, but they were treated as human beings, however, couldn't intermarry with the Mandinka population. That's sort of more close to the reality. It's like, how do you treat prisoners of war? How do you treat prisoners of war? That's what happened in Africa, in our home, before these kafirun, these disbelieving white devils. Because those who came were white devils. Not all white people are devils, but those who came were white devils and killed our people and created chaos. So I think he's onto something.
And the slave practices that existed previously in the world, like a chattel race-based, scientific race-based slavery was an invention of like the New World and like the post-rational, quote unquote, post-modernity Europe. So yeah, it was different, not different in name, but different in like all of the other qualities to it, in the sense that it created a racialized caste system.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a caste system even today.
Set the world economy on fire with all that labor able to be exploited, right? Like that's how the Western hemispheres were settled. That all the work was being done by African slaves often, or indentured servants, and they were all had it's a completely different thing.
We build the West. So colonization and slavery was the precursor of capitalism. They just took the master slave into the company, but before that it was the black people who just did the free labor. So it's completely true. We built all the wealth of the West. So they owe us and they need to pay us reparation, and they will pay us reparations because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just al-adl. And you reap what you sow, so they will get it back to them. One day they are going to pay.
Tribal slavery.
And it's a net positive for, say, like Europe
I don't like the word tribes,
and the Europeans
but
there, because they both were able.
Those jewels on the Queen.
On one hand, we exploited free labor from slaves and trafficked human beings and murdered them and raped them as a way to construct our society.
I can't listen to her. I'm forwarding. She's getting under my skin. She's so arrogant that it is disgusting.
I mean, right, exactly. All right, keep
Yeah,
going.
we should get.
I can't
There's a few
listen to
more
her.
interesting.
Let's listen to
tidbits.
Yeah,
Candace.
yeah. She's actually honestly seems like she's struggling through this one, even her.
European nations had slavery. So it's an evil that was not started, did not begin in Europe, actually. It can actually be traced back to Muslim origins. And
No, Arab imperialists. Separate that from Islam. Islam through Sufi missionaries spread peacefully. Arab imperialism is something else. So don't blame Islam for that. That's a right-wing rhetoric.
for whatever reason, people have this fantastical rendition of history where they think that it was only white people that ever did anything bad, when in fact the truth is that even in terms of our own history, American history, it was the Africans that were selling the Africans to...
You're creating a right-wing narrative. This is not true. Yeah, Africans did bads, but one small bad is not the same as the tyranny and genocide of Western imperialist power. So don't even come close to equating those two, Candace.
to the Europeans.
Wow.
And usually
Pause
for
it.
things as big...
Why did that system get set up, Candace? Why was that the case? Who implemented
I'm
the
not
system
listening to
in
her.
which that
She's
that
irritating.
extractive
Let's listen to
slave trade
Candace.
was?
Prove.
All right, keep going.
basic as gin and mirrors. I talk about this in that were selling the Africans to the Europeans. And usually for things as basic as gin and mirrors. I talk about this in my book. Like it was really basic things. And when Europeans
You
set out
don't
to
have the
end
true history,
slavery,
Candace.
by the way,
The
it was
history is
white men that were the
whitewashed. Don't walk around there on Fox News, whatever right-wing channels you're on. Whitewashed history is what you've learned, and then you go and spread misinformation to people. You don't know the true history of West Africa. You don't know it because it's not written in the white books, because who writes the white books? White men. If you want, that's his story. But you don't know your story. If you want to know the true story, you need to listen to black scholars, some of which are professors now, even in Harvard, who are Muslim, who are Sufi Muslim, who tell the truth of what happened in West Africa. So don't spread misinformation based on whitewashed history. That's my advice.
first in the world to abolish the slave trade, right? People don't like that fact.
well, yeah.
It's a very inconvenient fact from the
That's
narrative.
stupid.
Anytime there's a slave revolt, that is non-white people deciding that they want to abolish slavery. They were not empowered enough to do so.
In
Let's
the end,
listen
it
to
was the
Candace
slave
again.
master.
Keep going.
White people are evil and backwards. They were not the first to do it, but they were the first to end it. That is the truth. I think it was France first, followed by the UK, followed by America that ended the slave trade.
How'd that
It was
happen?
actually
Keep going.
Africans that fought and said, no, we want to maintain the system of slavery because it is good for us. So this is something, as I said, that can be traced back to people just being extremely ignorant about history, because everything has literally been transformed into a black and white narrative, pun very much intended.
Yeah, who
By who?
capitalized? If you
By white people.
can give it, who capitalized on that system? Right, like the proof is in the pudding. Like, why
Yeah.
is Charleston, South Carolina? Why does that exist? Right, and who built that?
So I'm just gonna stop here and say, Candace. I think it's healthy for black people to see a black woman being a conservative. Straight up, I think Candace has a side effect of her work, which is positive for black people. That may be not what Candace intends, but it's good for black people to see a black woman like Candace, who is a conservative, that breaks black people from the claws of the left-wing people like this woman. I cannot listen to this woman. I think she's racist. She's just a hidden racist, and she patronizes black people. Little poor people, you need a white woman who's gonna save you, who is left-wing, who doesn't know shit about Marx. But anyway, it's so patronizing, it's so irritating to have these kinds of saviors on the left wing for black people. I prefer Candace over that, even though her analysis of the slave trade was very whitewashed and very Fox News and very all over the place. I think that as a black woman, she has the right to have her opinion of slavery. And another positive, even though it's all over the place, another positive consequence of Candace is that it kind of kicks black people a little bit in the butt, like, do for yourself. Come on, guys, stop blaming slavery. It's time to work. It's time to take responsibility. And that message from Candace, I completely and utterly, with all of my being, support. Do for self, like Elijah Muhammad said. So Candace Owens has this do for self underlying message in her teaching, which is way more healthy for black people, way more black power for black people than white patronizing left-wing people who think that, no, little sorry you. All right, so these are my 2 cents. Allahu alam. Hopefully this was interesting. Peace.